Hey guys, this is a tutorial explaining the advanced functions of Fabfilter's Pro Limiter. Now, the reason I made this video was to demystify all of the features of this limiter, including what the attack and release can do, all the different sound types, as well as understanding metering. This limiter really has it all, and I want to help you guys unleash its power. So do you use this limiter? What experiences do you have with it? Or are you someone who is thinking of buying? The first thing I'm going to talk about though is not talking about Fabfilter's limiter, but talk about something you need to do to prepare for mastering, and that is gain staging and making sure that there's no clipping. So I highly recommend you check out my other video on gain staging and clipping up here. Now this video is indexed, so if you don't want to hear about this, and I recommend that you do, then you can skip to the tutorial. But there's no point in mastering if your mix is in the red, i.e. if it's clipping, and I'll briefly explain what I mean. There are three places where your mix can clip. The most obvious is the master. And it's easy to see this in Ableton because the signal becomes red. The next place is on each track, and once again it's easy to see because the signal's red there too. Then finally, within your FX chain for each track, you could go into the red there too. But what's really important is to check each element of the FX chain, because if you say you have one plugin which causes clipping or distortion, you can hide that distortion in the next plugin in the chain. So here's an example using OTT, which is a common offender. You can see here that OTT is causing clipping, but there's a compressor that reduces the signal so the clipping is not visible. It's green, and in the track and on the master you see it green, and actually that signal is clipping, and that does sound terrible, and that carries through and you just don't see it, and you're wondering what's going on. So in order to get the most out of the Fabfilter limiter, make sure there's just no clipping anywhere first, and then second, make sure that you have enough headroom to play with. Headroom just means you have volume that allows you to make the master punchier. So if you say leave 1 dB of headroom, that punchiness will go up by 1 dB, for example, before clipping. So it just takes away from the power of the master. A trick to get around this is if your mixes are really loud, select all the tracks in the mix and say reduce by 5 or 10 dB, and that can give you some nice headroom, and you can even do more than that if you want, because on the limiter then you can increase the gain to the level that you want. So sorry I spent so much time not talking about Pro L2, but it's really important to understand these concepts first, otherwise no mastering tool is going to help you. So once your mix is gain staged and has no clipping, finally we can get into the tutorial. So let's go. So Fabfilter itself, the thing I really love about it is you can have a look at it like this. Let's bring the gain down. So you can just see it like as a basic sort of metering system. Then you can change the size of it to small, and what we're going to do right now is bring it to its biggest level, which is large. Center that into the screen. If you really want, you can just maximize it so all you see is the limiter, just like that. So the first thing we're going to do is go and look at the output levels. So if we select output here and then click on the unity gain button, what we can do is increase the gain, but we won't actually hear that perceived loudness. What we will hear is what that increase in gain does to the sound. So you need to use your ears here to make sure that you still have a good sound when you're increasing the gain. So just listen to this. Now at around this sort of 20 mark, actually going to about anything over 15 really, you can actually start hearing the degradation and the distortion that is caused by the gain. And that's what's so good about unity gain, is you can actually really hear what's going on in the song, because as the gain goes up, there is a perceived increase in gain, but there's also a slight decrease in the actual quality of the sound. So you need to be super careful. But Fabfilter has quite a lot of tools that will help you with protecting you from that problem. So the first one is this, which is the metering. So with the metering, what you can do is you can select these kind of different metering options. So for example, we can select LUFS as a option. Spotify and YouTube recommend a -14 LUFS standard. Now I tend to use 12. If you go to 10 and 9, I think that's also fine. And the reason I use 12 is because it's just to play it safe, because the 14 LUFS standard could be today's standard, but in a year's time, Spotify might announce it's 12 or 10, or it might announce 16. We don't know. I think it's safe to bring it to -12 personally. And that's where you can go into custom and just change it to -12. But this is just what I do. You have to make your own mastering decisions. So what will happen here is you'll have this kind of short-term LUFS at -12. Let's actually bring it back to -14. So it's just a standard set. And we'll just see what happens to the metering for this particular song. We'll bring the gain down a bit to right to the bottom. Okay, so as you move that up, you get that sort of short-term LUFS, so you can see what the value is at that sort of short-term. Means it's really listening to 5-10 seconds of the song and working out what the loudness is. If you really want to know the loudness of the entire song, then you need to change to integrated, and you need to really play most of the song or even the entire song to know what it is. So yeah, you'd want to play the entire song out, and that's probably the most accurate way to work out the LUFS value of your song. For example, if you end up with -9.7, but you're looking for -14, then you may, in that case, may want to decrease it. Okay? If it's higher, you may want to increase it. So you need just to play around with the figures. So that type of metering is really useful. So that's absolute metering, so we can check and compare our levels to the target. And yeah, it goes into the red if it goes into the bad, and it stays green if it's okay. And then you've got this other possibility called relative, and it's basically the same thing, but it says that 0 is where we want to be. But if it goes below 0, it's going to be in the green. If it goes above 0, it's going to be in the red. So it's just another way to do your metering. But most people, including myself, will just want to see it at -14 or -12 or whatever. Now, so the other advanced things that I wanted to show you was these styles. Now, what we can do is just bring the gain up just slightly here and see what the mastering sounds like for all the styles. And there's quite a few to choose from, and they all have specific purposes in mind, and there's no right or wrong answers. But I think if you're doing EDM music, you really want to either select modern, aggressive, all-round, or punchy. You could possibly choose dynamic, but punchy is one type of limiting that preserves transients. Modern is the default, which has a good mix of transients and loudness. And aggressive is proper loud. Then you've got all round, which is one I use, which kind of is a balanced approach, which is still good for EDM music. Transparent is more for things like rock, and safe would be for classical music. There's 0 distortion happening. And bus is for bus mastering. So if you want to glue together some vocals or your drum tracks, that's extremely useful for overall mastering and getting the right levels of loudness. So let's have a listen to the difference. And what you can do now is actually we can listen to the delta. We can see what Pro L is adding. So let's have a listen. We'll start with transparent. Punchy. Okay, so I won't go through all of them, but what we will do is listen to the delta. We'll listen to the effect it's having on the track. So let's start again at transparent. So transparent's having no effect on the track. And that makes sense because it's transparent. It's not coloring the track whatsoever. Let's actually bring this up a bit so we can actually hear some of it. So as you can see, these are the compensations the system's making. So that's punchy. Let's just go back to transparent. Dynamic. So this is what it's adding really to the track. Allround. Aggressive. And modern. Now we've got true peak limiting on. So when you do your limiting, it does get you to a certain level that you want. So minus 14 LUFS, but there's a conversion problem sometimes between digital and analog, which gives you a little bit of clipping. And Pro L enables you to see what that clipping is and whether it goes over a certain level. You need to have this metering option on, TP. So what we can do is just listen to it like this. So as you can see here, it's actually going over 0 by a bit, by a little bit. And the ways to compensate for that are either to select true peak limiting. That will never go over 0. So one way to get that number down is to add some oversampling. So let's try and add +2 and see how that changes the number. So you can see straight away it has reduced it a little bit. Let's actually increase it to 8. So in that case, it seems to have pretty much gotten rid of it. But you do still want to click on true peak limiting at this point. So oversampling gets rid of those inter-alias distortions, and it also helps with true peak limiting. So if you can, I would use oversampling. Now let's look at attack time. Generally, shorter attack times are safer and longer attack times are louder. So what we mean by louder is it's more distortion. So you need to get the balance between distortion and safe loudness right. And once again, the best way to do that is to listen to what's happening when you change the attack. So we've got attack right at the edges there. Let's increase the attack. Reduce the attack.
If you're feeling alone, it's not too late.
So I generally like to keep the attack around what is a default number, which is around 140, 150 milliseconds. Now with the release, generally the shorter release times are punchier and louder, and longer release times give a cleaner result. So let's listen to what happens when we play with the release. Punchier. Less punchy, but less distortion. Once again, you want sweet spot, and I tend to keep the attack and release at the same sort of levels. So next one is channel linking. So the channel linking just describes how the left and right channel are affected by the limiter. So if you bring it right down to 0, it means there is no link between the right and left channel. So say, for example, the left channel is peaking or is in a clip zone, the right channel is not. That 0% linkage will fix the right channel, but it will not affect the left channel. Now, if you go all the way to 100%, it will reduce both channels. It affects both channels the same. Once again, it's about listening and seeing what happens to your mix. So let's just listen to what happens if we start at 0. So I like to keep that one closer to 0 because I actually think it makes the mix a bit more open sounding. And that's the same with release. So what release is doing is saying it's looking at this release and it's saying how much of the channels are linked. All right. So if it's 0, it means the channels are not linked at all. Left and right channel are affected by the release completely separately. And if you go 100%, they are affected in the same way. Once again, we can have a quick listen. So for me, once again, I like to keep it a bit closer to 0, the channel linking, but it's down to you guys what you prefer. And then finally, we have Lookahead. So the Lookahead knob just tells you how quickly the limiter responds to sudden peaks in the audio signal. So with shorter Lookahead times, you can achieve greater loudness, but potentially adding distortion. So when you reduce it right down to 0, let's actually switch oversampling off and listen to the delta, see what happens when the Lookahead is very, very quick. You can hear some distortion there. Okay, so if we add oversampling, it gets rid of that distortion. It's still there a bit, but it's not as bad as it was. So if you want to have greater loudness, you have a shorter Lookahead, but you need to have oversampling. Well, you don't need to, but you will have distortion if you don't have that. So one quick, what I would call hack, is to go and look at the presets. So the presets, starting from basic, and you've got loud, moderate, safe, you have quite a lot of different types of presets. So if you're in the EDM game, you want to pick one of these types of presets. But where there's a bit of a hack is you can actually go to one of your favorite presets and you can see how Fabfilter recommend the settings to look like. Right? So for example, if you want an aggressive EDM sound, so aggressive EDM is about as loud and as aggressive as you can get. These are your settings: very fast Lookahead, fast attack, fast release, transients, 100% release, 25%. So it's a good way to learn is by looking at the presets. So that's a little bit of a hack, a little bit of a trick that I think you guys can learn from. So there's just one more thing I wanted to show you guys, which was the Dither. Now, if you want your song to be processed in CD, for example, which is a 16-bit processing, you want to have your Dither at 16. If you want it at 24 bits, you can do it like that. I think mostly Ableton will process your song at 32 bits. So I actually don't think you need this Dither unless you want to process down. And if that is the case, then what Dither does is gets rid of any sort of artifacts or sounds caused by that conversion. So I would recommend you use that. In terms of noise shaping, I would just always use optimized. But actually, I don't use any of it. I'm just showing you that because when I actually go and export the track myself in Ableton, I will select a Dither option here and a bit length option here. So you can, so it works in 32-bit. You can bring it down to 16 or 24-bit. So you can actually do it in Ableton. So I don't really do it here because then you're doing it in two places, and I don't think that's going to be a good idea. If you are going to do it in Pro L2, then I would select no Dither in Ableton. And that is it. So do you guys use Pro L2? Do you like Pro L2? Are you thinking about getting Pro L2? Do you already have Pro L2 and you love Pro L2? Let me know, because I'm interested to see what you guys think. Ozone 10 has just come out, and I'm looking at that pretty closely, but still, in my opinion, this is the king, the overall winner for mastering. So let me know and have a great day. Thanks a lot.